Your child is falling apart and you're supposed to use a really gentle voice and sound like a weird robot that has no emotion. And that's weird. Like, that is not human.
It's weird.
Okay, so let's record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads, we love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey,
hey,
Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take.
All right, Matt, today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, co-author of so many good books like No Drama Discipline, The Whole Brain Child, The Yes Brain, Power Showing Up. A lot of books that you've referenced a lot on this program that have really helped me sort of grow. Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, we're going to call you Tina. Tina, thanks for coming on. So pumped to have you on here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing this.
How do you want to dive in, Matt?
First of all, it's just wild that you're here. I mean, I got to give my wife credit because it's through her that I was introduced to your work. But like, you've been in our house and my kids have benefited from it. So thanks. So many of your books have been this kind of evolution from this idea of the whole brain child. And then it's kind of like, okay, how do we look at the whole brain child in terms of discipline? How do we look at it in terms of your upcoming book is in terms of play? But I wonder if we could start by like defining, when you say the whole brain child, what does that mean to you?
So really, it's the idea that obviously we bring our genetics to who we are as people, right? So our kids are born, they have a set of genetics that are going to really have a lot to do with who they turn out. And I'm generalizing about 50% of how they turn out. The other 50%, it has to do with the repeated experiences they have. And so what really the whole brain child is about how we can provide repeated experiences because we are mammals and relationships are our most important thing that helps us, first of all, survive, and then that allows our brain to develop and grow. So it's really about the repeated relational experiences we have that determine how our brain gets wired. And we know that the brain is really, really plastic throughout childhood and even through the 20s until about the mid to late 20s, meaning that it is really, really moldable based on our experiences. So as parents or caregivers, we can provide the kinds of experiences that allow their brain to fire and wire to become integrated, meaning that the different parts of the brain can work together as a whole so that they have the best capacity as they go out into the world.
And when you're saying parts working together, you're talking like the cortex versus the reptile part?
Yeah, in the whole brain child, we talk about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, right? So the lower structures of the brain that are more primitive, and it's not that they're not as good, right? They're really, really crucial and important. And the higher structures of the brain, including the cortex and the prefrontal cortex, and then also like the left and the right side of the brain. And then we move beyond that into even memory and how different parts of the brain that consolidate memory. And then we can actually take this idea of integration outside of the structures of the brain and talk about it in terms of relationships as well. The way I teach it to kids with the upstairs brain is I say the higher parts of your brain are the parts of your brain that allow you to pause and make calm, kind choices and be a problem solver. And the lower parts of your brain, your downstairs brain, this is the part of your brain that just feels big feelings and just wants to do something really fast. And so if we don't have the part of our brain, our upstairs brain, our prefrontal cortex, that allows us to pause, make calm, kind choices, and be a problem solver, and we're just operating out of that more primitive downstairs brain, we are going to make lots of mistakes. And that's where we can't regulate our emotions or our behavior or have empathy for others, etc. So what that means to me then is that these specialized parts of the brain need to be working in coordination and integrated with each other. So integration, as we talk about it in the book, is about specialization of the parts of the brain that do their jobs like they're supposed to, and they're functionally linked with each other. So our children have a whole brain capacity as they go out into the world.
That word regulation has kind of become a buzzword. And like, whenever something becomes a buzzword, there's a good part about it because it's like, oh, people are gaining awareness of this important thing. But it also can start to lose its meaning because it's like now people just use gentle parenting. I'm like, what the fuck? Like that means so many different things to so many different people.
Let me say this. Okay, so First of all, before I define what I mean when I say regulation, I was giving a talk last night, a virtual talk. And one of the questions was about gentle parenting or respectful parenting. And I was like, well, first of all, we have to define terms. And our books, Dan's and my books, are very much lumped into the gentle parenting kind of umbrella. And I actually reject that. It depends on what we mean. But what people often do when they read our books or they get really into the gentle parenting, respectful parenting movement, what they think that means oftentimes is actually what I would define as permissive parenting, where your child's emotions rule the household, where you are held captive to your child's emotions, they're held captive to them. And I'll have parents say like, you know, what do I do after I've had a 40-minute reflective conversation with my child about their feelings, about putting their shoes on, and they won't get in the car, they won't put their shoes on, what do I do? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not what we're supposed to be doing here. Yeah. So I think, do we want to be gentle with our children and their emotions and their little bodies? Of course we do. Do we want to be respectful of them? Of course we do. But you know what else we want to do? Follow the research that is 70 plus years that shows that kids need not just the nurture of gentleness and respect and what we want to model for them in terms of how you treat humans, but they also need the structure of limits and rules and boundaries because it makes them feel safe. And the brain loves what's predictable. And when we have rules, boundaries, and limits, it becomes predictable. So it makes them feel a lot safer. So I think people get that really wrong. And I think where we go back to regulation is we have really gone off the rails here on social media, particularly where you'll have parents who think that what they're supposed to be doing is to co-regulate, which I'm a huge fan of, and I'll define that in just a minute. But what they think that means is your child is falling apart and you're supposed to use a really gentle voice and sound like a weird robot that has no emotion. And that's weird. Like, that is not human. And so
it's weird.
Yeah. So let me define what regulation is, and then we'll talk about what co-regulation can look like. And it's not weird. So I'm going to borrow Dan Siegel, my co-author's definition of regulation. I actually just heard it from him a couple of years ago, and I love it. It's better than anything I've heard, I think. Regulation is the ability to monitor and modify. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if I'm talking about emotional regulation, that means as a parent, if I'm going to be emotionally regulated, I'm going to monitor like, oh God, I'm getting pissed here. I'm noticing I'm getting really upset and this is not going to go well unless I stop. So I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to, tap out and have my husband step in, or I'm going to say to my kid, I'm too mad to handle this the way I want to right now. I'm going to go calm my body down. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's the ability. I'm noticing, I'm monitoring, and then I'm modifying. So what co-regulation is monitoring and modifying your child's behaviors or emotions. Okay. So you're noticing, oh my gosh, my kid's really melting down. They're having really, or they're feeling really embarrassed right now, or they're just, I don't know what they're feeling, but they are not in control of themselves. So what can I do to help modify and move them from this reactive state back into a regulated state where they can?
I didn't realize that. It's not just monitor and fake it.
Yeah.
It's not, oh my God, I'm getting upset.
Yeah.
Just stuff it down.
Shove it down.
And just pretend to be nice and say it in a passive aggressive voice like a psychopath. It's like, no, what are the strategies that the child can and should use to get themselves out of this like feeling that they don't like?
Right.
What can I do to, like, that co-regulation could be, let's go for a walk together and talk about it in an hour.
Yeah. And I think when you think about that definition, it's also so helpful when you really see your child out of control. They can't monitor or modify their state right now. Mm-hmm. They can't, right? So then it's like, okay, well, they might need my help here. And so what does that look like? Well, it can look like lots of things. Co-regulation, it's where I'm still able to notice what I'm doing and I can shift it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a flexibility that comes about from that moment as opposed to a rigid reactivity where I'm just screaming or something. I might even be really annoyed with my kid and be like, are you kidding? Like we've talked about this 6 times and I just stepped in your sauce that you dripped on the floor. Like, that's really annoying to me. I'm still regulated. I'm not out of control. I'm not screaming, but I have human emotions that are authentic and I'm wanting him to modify his behavior in response to a real relational interaction. So it's not this weird, creepy, inauthentic, fake or super hyper calm that kind of is like a little serial killer sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think it really is about together we shift out of that kind of higher state of emotion, but we're still regulated.
Max and I have talked throughout doing this podcast. It's so many episodes start being about something else, and then like 35 minutes in, we're like, but my anger. And like, I think the way we've talked about it in all these different ways, Max, you'll often say things like, I felt like not myself. And for me, I often think of it as like, I wasn't making choices. But it is so good to make that distinction that like, yeah, anger is a part of every relationship. So it's not like you're going to eliminate an expression of frustration. It's staying in that place where you are making choices about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Something that I really wanted to ask you about is, if I have time and it's just me and the kids and I got 30 minutes, I'm like batting 1,000. I think that it's going to go well. The things that I still have not quite figured out are those once in a 50-year or 50-day storm. Let's say
50 hour, you know.
No. Honestly, like, I remember that time I went like 8 months without anything. It's like,
do you have one of those signs up in your house like it's been 50 days since the last incident?
Yeah, since the last
Dad's
T-Rex
last
attack.
explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what happens is, like, I sometimes these feel inevitable where you need to be at the airport. You didn't get good sleep last night.
Yeah.
The kids didn't get good sleep last night. They won't eat the breakfast. And then your 4-year-old is refusing to go pee before you get in the car for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then your older kid takes off his shoes and throws them. And then you get injured. So then you scream and then you got to leave 5 minutes ago. It's like those moments where I know the right thing to do if I had 20 minutes. I don't have the time. And then it comes out in a yelly thing.
Yep.
What do you do when you don't have the time? And that's an extreme case.
Yeah.
But even just like you're going to school, how do you deal with those sorts of moments?
Okay, so let me say this, that, you know, that whole range of what you just walked through, that is normal family life under good circumstances, even the fall apart stuff, right? And I think that we need to have a whole range of human emotions because our children are human and they have a whole range of emotions. And we talk about this in The Power of Showing Up. The literature shows that when we lose it with our kids, when we have these moments where we flip our lids, right, our upstairs brain goes offline and we end up yelling or doing something insane that I'll tell you, like I did a little while ago. When that happens, as long as we make the repair, it's actually beneficial for our kids. And here's why. So I mean, obviously everyone's like, yeah, I know you're modeling repair. That's great. So that is definitely a benefit. But remember I said the brain loves predictability. So what happens is dad's predictable. You're patient until you're not, right? And usually our kids don't remember that you've been patient for 45 minutes. They remember the moment, you know, you yelled. And you want some credit, right? They don't give you any credit. So what happens then in that moment is you have become unpredictable. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is under the best scenario because some parents are predictably out of control all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So you've kind of ruptured their felt sense of, oh gosh, I thought I could count on him to kind of be patient, right? So there's this moment of, that's crazy, or I don't like that, or that feels really bad, or that was scary. And then because you've done it over and over and over, even though that's an awful feeling, they're like, oh, the messiness of this does not feel good. I didn't like how dad was. I know that he's going to come make it right very soon and we're going to get right back on track. So it gives them relational resilience, knowing that even in that moment of adversity, you guys are going to move back into reconnection really quickly. So that actually gives them a lot of relational resilience because, as you know, relationships are messy and we are going to have those moments. So you're very human to have that moment. I was playing Yahtzee with my 3 boys, and they're all 3 years apart. They were probably like 6, 9, and 12 or something at the time. And they were fighting with each other. And I know the research says that that means that they're going to have a much higher chance of being friends later, but I hate it, right? It's like one of the least pleasant parts of parenting is all the bickering and all the fighting. So they were fighting with each other. And I knew I was about to flip my lid because for me, like my off ramp toward losing my shit is biting immature sarcasm. So I start with like, I'm so glad we're doing family game night. What a great time I'm having. And so I should have known, right? I know that I'm on the slippery slope to about to lose it. And then they kept fighting. Okay. Now here's what I should have done was to set a boundary earlier so that I didn't lose it. And so I should have just said, guys, this isn't fun for me. It's totally fine if you guys aren't getting along, but I don't want to play then, right? I would have just set a boundary. It would have been fine, but I didn't. And they continued to escalate. And eventually I got so mad that I ended up screaming at them and throwing the dice across the room like an insane person, right?
Did you scream Yahtzee?
That would have been awesome. Oh my God. No one's ever made that joke before. I love that. So I think I hid the Yahtzee game for a while after that, but I have Yahtzee trauma. So then I was like, oh. And I look at my kids' faces. That's one thing that's really helpful when you lose it like that. Make yourself look at your kids' faces. As soon as I looked at their faces, I was like, oh, shit. I took a breath and I was like, guys, now what I want to say is if you little shits had not kept fighting, this would not have happened. But I want my kids to know that they are responsible for their own behavior no matter what anybody else does. So I can't say that. So and because I'm back regulated enough and I know I'm like in my right mind again, I know not to say that. So I say, guys, I got really mad there and I handled that so poorly. It's totally okay to be angry, but it's not okay to yell at people and throw things. Like, I'm so sorry that happened. Will you forgive me? And can I have a do-over? So it's just about moving back into a reconnection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we just had a blow up. I had a blow up with my 4-year-old like 2 months ago. Told Matt about it. I was feeling shitty about it. And what Matt kind of recognized was he's like, what did your daughter say? And right after I screamed, she goes, Daddy, that's not okay. You're going to need to say sorry to me for that.
Awesome.
And Matt was like, the fact that she knows that you're not going to like,
yeah,
that's your thing of saying like there was that pattern of like, even if it's happened a handful of times,
it's predictable.
And then afterward, I felt kind of not good about it, but I didn't feel shame because I was like, it is normal.
Yeah.
And 2, my kids will freak out. And if they've never seen someone freak out and then be like, yo, not cool, guys, I should not have done that.
Yeah.
Then how will they know to apologize when they, well, I mean, I don't know, looking for a silver lining, I guess.
I also think that the fact that she was like, you need to apologize, the alternative to that and your fear with your kids is that like, oh, dad screamed because I'm bad.
Right.
Not dad screamed because dad messed up.
I love that. Yeah.
So that's like,
that was about him, not about her. And she knew that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Word. Yeah. And that gets into that idea that y'all talk about a lot of mindsight.
Yeah.
That like, maybe you could, because you'll define it better than I will. So like talk about that idea of mindsight, both for you and your kids. Cause I think that's dope and a cool name.
So that's a Dan Siegel word that is a made up word that is fabulous. And it's the idea of really seeing your own mind and the mind of others. And so the opposite would be mind blind. You're not aware of your own mind. You're not aware of what's happening inside of you, and you're not aware of what's happening inside of other people. So it really is kind of the ability to see your inner landscape and to notice other people's inner landscape. I think that's exactly what that was, your daughter has already internalized that was about what was happening inside of you. And really, like, she also had the assumption of repair. She knew that was coming. I think the other thing that's really important to say is that, I remember one time, I wrote about this in No Drama Discipline. I threatened to remove one of my kids' body parts. My son. It was before I stopped doing timeouts eventually, because I actually find them really ineffective, and I think there's just better ways. Now, if you're hitting your kid, timeouts are far better, right? But in general, I don't think they're that helpful. Your kid is not sitting and reflecting on their behavior. They're sitting and reflecting about either, oh wow, here's a bug that I just found, in the corner of this little piece of carpet, or they're reflecting on how mean you are to put them there because it was their brother's fault in the first place, etc. So anyway, my son, Ben, had hit me. And so I started out with, and it was actually a time in, I had him sitting next to me, and I said something ridiculous and too precious, like, hands are for helping and for loving. And he hit me again. And I totally deserved that.
Fuck you, Mom.
And,
shut up.
And then he's like 3, right? So then I go to empathy. Ouch, that hurts mommy's body. And he was kind of like, I'm 3, so I'm basically a sociopath. Yeah. So he hit me again. And like, I don't know what my plan is, right? This is before I've written No Drama Discipline. And he's my first kid, right? So I'm like, well, now you're in timeout at the top of the stairs. Like, who cares, right?
Cool story, Hansel.
Yeah, cool.
So I march him up to the top of the stairs, and I'm like, you cannot hurt mommy. No hitting. Kind of like escalate. I pull out the power threat, kind of deal. And so he listens to me, but he kicks me in the shin instead. He doesn't hit me, but he kicks me in the shin.
Ooh, yeah.
So I flip my lid. My prefrontal integrated with my downstairs brain that is all about insight and empathy and impulse control, emotional and behavioral regulation is gone. And I start yelling at him and he sticks his tongue out at me.
Ooh.
And I say, if you stick that tongue out one more time, I'm going to rip it out of your mouth. And he collapsed onto the floor and said, you didn't make a good choice. And he was right. I was not choosing. My downstairs brain had taken over. But you know what? I called my friend and I was like, oh my God, I feel so horrible. I can't believe I did that. And she's like, oh, that's nothing. And then she started telling me about some of the things she was doing. But here's what's important. We can sit in shame. We can feel horrible about those moments, but they're human, right? So it's an unrealistic expectation for us to put on ourselves. But here's what's problematic. When we sit in shame, it actually makes us more vulnerable to flipping our lids again, because we're not in this as integrated, regulated states. So it makes us more vulnerable to continue that behavior. What I encourage all of us to do is when those moments happen, to become really curious about what happened. Because curiosity allows us actually to access more of our brain. It allows us to learn. It makes our brain more plastic to do something different the next time. And then we can say, okay, what happened there that got in the way of me being the parent I wanted to be? Mm-hmm. And sometimes really the answer is, I haven't peed by myself in 3 years and my blood sugar was really low and I haven't had 1 minute to myself. My patience ran out. Yeah. Or I was trying to get to the airport. Like, that was too much chaos for one human to handle. The demands of that moment far exceeded human capacity. So, okay, I forgive myself. I let it go. Other times it's like, God, I keep noticing this pattern. Mm-hmm. And when my kid makes that face, it reminds me of my dad who was really scary. Mm-hmm. And so I have to remember he's not my dad, right? I'm in charge here. So it might even require a little more reflection, but I think the response to those rupture moments should be curiosity more than shame.
How can I do it differently next time? Because you almost are blacked out in those moments. You kind of like lose yourself for a minute. And it reminds me a little bit of like the movie Memento, where he has to put tattoos on his body to like read like, oh shit, gorilla's coming out. Ah! Oh shit, read this. Oh, when you start feeling heat in your neck, that means you should turn around and walk away.
Yeah.
Like we almost need to have these instructions that like next time this happens, if this is a trigger for you to avoid it next time.
Maxie, this episode is brought to you by, there's this podcast out there. It's been growing, steadily growing. It's called Milkless. Mm-hmm. It's these two fucking chuckleheads. I'm not sure why anybody listens, but they do. And it's very exciting for us.
That's what you got? That's your ad?
Well, I thought you were going to say something. Like, how was the toss?
Matt, you're good at a lot of things. Our goal here is to let people know we're thankful for you guys listening. Please share this with a friend. It's how we're going to be able to grow. So send it to a friend, and we'd be thankful.
All right.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I was trying to like toss it off to you I thought that was a fucking layup. I liked you talking about like identifying that ramp of biting sarcasm that like I'm on my way to.
Yeah.
I've always thought of impulse control for myself in that way, that like the way I have impulse control is to stop before the edge.
Yeah.
Like I can't have an Xbox in my house because I'll be up till 4 a.m. Like when you become the gorilla, it's too late. So like what are all the things while you still have enough of your prefrontal cortex left? And man, I had a wild experience recently. I was having a real knockdown drag out with my 6-year-old. My 6-year-old's like our fighter. She's like an unbelievable human, but she's like, let's fucking go. She ain't scared of nobody. And she was just pushing. And I felt myself, we have this dog gate in our house that's really more of a 2-year-old gate. It represents containment to the bedroom wing of the house. But I was grabbing it, and then suddenly I realized I was like trying to break this metal gate without even knowing I was.
Yeah.
And my daughter was right in my face, hollering at me. And I was like, it was the last possible moment before this was going to be so horrible. And I kind of seemed like a crazy person. I was like, I gotta go. I'm going to do something crazy. And I turned around and I ran outside, and I walked through the garage, and I went outside into the driveway, and I was just out there for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's not like I came back in like feeling awesome, but I came back in not trying to break metal things.
Yeah.
And I followed up with my daughter after that, because I was kind of like, that probably seemed pretty weird. Like suddenly daddy's just running the other way. And she said, no, I liked that you did that.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
As long as you can make choices, you can make a different choice.
Yeah. If you have the presence of mind, you can say, hey, I just need a minute. But if you don't, first aid. Close your mouth, put your hands in your pockets, and get the hell out of there, right? Like, don't do harm. So how do we keep ourselves from getting there? Because you're right. Like, once the Reese's peanut butter bag is in the house and it's open, there's no stopping me, but I don't bring it into the house, right?
Yeah.
But what happens if the bag's on the counter, right? Like, what happens if you're in the moment and like your kid is totally melting down? So one is, and we've actually known about this since the 1930s, but Andrew Huberman has popularized it, but it's called the physiological sigh. And the whole idea of it is where your exhale is longer than your inhale. So you can breathe in for a count of like 4 and then breathe out for a count of 7 or 8, whatever it is. My child is having a storm. I want to be the calm in the storm. I don't want to join the storm. And by the way, these dysregulated states are super contagious, right? We are held captive to one another's nervous systems. Mm-hmm. So I literally put a hand on my chest and a hand on my belly and close my eyes and I do this sigh. And I do it 2 or 3 times. And as I'm doing it, I tell myself at his worst is when he needs you the most. Okay. I literally say that to myself inside my brain because the attachment science says when we are in stress or distress, that's when we most need to be connected and protected. That's how we are as mammals, right? But usually that's when we do the opposite, right? We add distress and stress. So I tell myself at his worst is when he needs you, right? So there are many, many moments as a parent where you're like, I don't know how to get out of this, or I don't know what to do. And I spend tons of cognitive and emotional energy and physical energy trying to fix something. But here's where the 4 S's from The Power of Showing Up help me. They are my North Star. Safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And these are the 4 S's that help when kids have repeated experiences, not perfect, of feeling safe and seen and soothed and secure and knowing you're going to show up for them. That's what leads to secure attachment. And secure attachment is one of the best predictors for how the brain gets integrated and how we turn out. Okay. Based on 80 plus years of cross-cultural longitudinal research. So it's my North Star. I'll just give an example of a 4-year-old. And by the way, any story I ever tell about my kids, I have permission from my kids to tell.
Cool.
Because now they're older and, it's their stuff. So anyway, my 4-year-old JP was in the tub and I knew it was not going to be I was like prepping myself. I'm like, the transition from this to bed is going to be really, really ugly. So the first thing I'm going to do is help JP feel safe by, first of all, staying regulated myself. Like, right. I want to be predictable. I want to be the safe landing spot, the calm of the storm. So I do what I need to do to stay regulated in that moment. And if I don't, I'll repair, because then that's safe too. And I'm going to hold my limit. It's time to get out of the bathtub, right? I'm predictable. Mm-hmm. I've set the limit. It helps him feel safe. So I say, you can either get out by yourself or I will help you out. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting out. So as I'm lifting him out, I'm going to practice seen. And seen is the idea of seeing the mind behind the behavior. It's the mind sight piece. So what I'm going to do is I want my response to match how he's feeling on the inside, not in terms of my behavior, mm-hmm. but with my words. So I'm going to say, you're so mad. You have to get out of the tub. Is that right? So now I'm giving him language that matches what he's feeling on the inside. Mm-hmm. And he knows, like, my mom gets me. She knows me. She knows what I'm feeling. And as I'm staying calm, I'm also showing him, I can handle your big feelings. Mm-hmm. You don't have to protect me. As I'm lifting him out, I wrap the towel around him and I pull him to me. And now I'm practicing soothed, which is the co-regulation, support, comfort, I've got you kind of piece. And the key around that is just my presence, right? And I say, sometimes it's so hard when things don't go the way you want them to. It's so hard, baby. I know, I'm right here. And I'm right here with you while you're feeling so mad. And then that's it. And I say to him, you can cry if you need to. I'm right here with you. Yeah. So I don't have to fix it. I don't have to change it. And at the end of that, mm-hmm. my kid now gets the 4th S of secure and knowing his brain is going to wire from these repeated experiences to feel like I kept him safe. He was seen. He was soothed. Like he fell apart and he got the message from me that my mom can totally handle my big feelings. And she believes that I can handle my big feelings. She didn't distract me with an iPad. She didn't threaten me. She didn't give in on the boundary. Like, okay, fine, you can stay in the bathtub. Like, she let me feel all those uncomfortable feelings because that's how resilience gets built. You can't have resilience building without emotion and without adversity. Yeah. Resilience gets built from adversity plus enough connection. Yeah. That's what leads to resilience.
You know what's incredible about that is I've done it right exactly like that sometimes. And I didn't really know why, but then you said it. The times I've done it well is when you can see it coming and you're like, oh, this is going to be a fucking thing. This is going to be like 30, 40 minutes. And then it's like, here we go. Let us enter the dragon.
Yeah.
And then when you can do it, it feels amazing.
Yeah. Because then you feel
true.
kind of almost like it's not happening to you. And like, you're not, it's almost like you're not disassociating, but you see it more as a third person.
Yeah.
You're not the protagonist anymore.
Yeah.
It's like it's easier.
You can be the player on the field, but you can also be the spectator in the stands, right? Mm-hmm. So I actually coach parents to be like, okay, if you're driving the minivan and your kids are fighting in the back and you can feel your temperature going up, I want you to literally imagine yourself like above the minivan looking in at yourself and your kids, and you get so much more perspective. So when you get that, what you're really doing is you're totally engaging your prefrontal cortex, which keeps it from going offline. So I think it's a really great strategy, and it's really kind of a metacognition strategy, or sort of paying attention on purpose to what's happening there. But and by the way, if any of this sounds like, I don't know that I could do this, any of this, our brains are plastic throughout our lifespan. And just like children, the number one way we learn how to do anything is by practicing doing it, right? When we start practicing this, it becomes automatic for us.
Yeah. You know what else I find when I'm able to kind of have that from the stands perspective is sometimes it's hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
Like the thing that's happening to me if I'm just in it, that would be so infuriating. If you're just watching it, it's like the absurdity of this moment is...
Right.
Well, the splash from third person is funny.
Right.
The splash, if you're like the temperature's going up and you're just stuffing it down, that splash, changes the 4S's to like,
absolutely.
Smother your son with a tsunami. Like,
smother, strangle, flash. I don't think these S's are
sever tongue. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It never occurred to me until I had kids. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because you mentioned earlier emotions are kind of contagious, right? I mean, if you walk into a movie and somebody's crying on screen, you're like 20% of the way to crying without even knowing what's happening. That's just kind of how we're wired.
Yep.
But it seems like such a value as a parent to be able to have people feeling, particularly kids. But then I've also found this in work context, when somebody's like really been out of shape and irrational, like to let them have that, but not have it yourself.
Yeah.
But that seems fucking hard to me.
It's hard.
Especially with your kids who you live and die with your kids, right? Like their happiness is so critical to you. So how do you think about it in those terms of like letting them have a feeling without having to have the feeling yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we join them in their feeling, it is kind of like an enmeshed thing, right? But it is like, let's talk about the science behind this for just a second. Okay. So we have these things called mirror neurons, and people argue about what they actually mean, right? There's a lot of controversy in the field. But basically it's these neurons that we have that fire when we're observing another person doing something that we would do. So if I'm taking a drink of water, your neurons are firing as if you were taking a drink of water, right? And this is true not just of what we see, but when we're reading, et cetera. So there are lots of really interesting things to think about this. But keep in mind, like if you're watching Dancing with the Stars, your legs and arms aren't flailing as if you're dancing too, right? So we do also have this strip of neurons that basically stop us from enacting every single thing we see or hear, right? So we have to think about that kind of on this level, that if we join our children in their emotional states, we are no longer any help to them. Basically, they then get the message like, my grown up just joins me in the chaos. The other thing I'll mention is we really are meaning makers for our children. And I think that's a really important thing to hold in mind. There was this study that was done. They I don't know why, but they freaked out all these chickens. They scared all these chickens. Mm-hmm. And I think the purpose of the research was to see what helped chickens calm down when they were freaked out. So they tried all these different things to calm them down. And the chickens that stayed freaked out the longest were the ones looking in a mirror. Mm-hmm. Now, they don't have theory of mind. They're not super smart. And so they don't know that they're looking at themselves. They think they're looking at another freaked out chicken. Mm-hmm. So what happens, and especially early early childhood, or when our children have flipped their lids and they're not accessing their prefrontal cortex, they are looking to our faces, our bodies, what we're saying, our verbal and nonverbal communication to understand the meaning of this. Now, you all have seen on social media, and they make me laugh so hard, the kind of fake freak out where someone like screams and acts like something scary is happening and their partner like totally screams and jumps.
Yeah.
This is such a good analogy for what we're talking about here. We are meant to be held captive to one another's nervous systems, but we have to also remember that we are not that person. I think about this too. I fly a lot because I speak. When there's turbulence, if the flight attendant just continues to serve drinks like nothing's happening, that gives me meaning like it's probably fine. If the flight attendant starts freaking out, I'm like, oh shit, we're going, like, this is really, really bad.
Love it when the captain comes on and is just like, we're going to have a little bit of rough air.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, you called it rough air.
Ooh,
I
yeah.
love rough air.
They have changed it to rough air. Yeah.
Brought to you by Violet Archer in the case of the Purple Martin.